Hey, recovery guy here. I wanted to do a video for you guys about why I decided to do the steps and also why I think the steps work so well. There's something about the steps that really throw people off. It gives people the wrong message. There's a lot of misinformation about there. Lots of people get scared of the God idea. They think it's wishy-washy. They think it's woo-woo. They don't. There's something that's built in the steps that people have this kind of automatic like association, kind of like disgust, sensitivity towards doing the steps, and I do believe that in people's subconscious they do associate the steps with organized religion. I read articles on Facebook and in the newspaper about people who talk about how the steps don't work. I actually recently read an article about a lady who's got about 4 years clean, and she actually went through the steps. She got clean. She got around 3.5 years, and then she decided that she didn't really like the steps anymore. She didn't like the fellowship. I don't know what fellowship she was a part of, and she slowly stepped away from it. And then she wrote this article about how she's got no hard feelings against the steps, but these are all the reasons why she thinks they're wrong, or why she doesn't want to partake in them anymore. And I think stuff like that's really weird, because she did do the steps to get sober in the first place, and now she's writing an article saying, I don't have anything against it, but here's all the things I have against it. So, and I don't blame her. Like, I'm sure I get like that with certain subjects too, and I just think there's so much misinformation going around about the steps, and it bothers me because people don't want to do them because of this misinformation, and they really don't commit to them, or they kind of get in there and they look around, they go, is it as stupid as I thought? Yes, it is. Maybe I'll give it a shot. I don't know. And then they go around telling people that they did the steps and it didn't work. And I'm not saying the steps will just 100% work for every single person. I'm not one of those like 12-step thumpers who just think that's the end-all be-all. If you do anything other than that, you're gonna die and you're gonna relapse horribly and your family's gonna, like, I'm not like that, but I do honestly think, for many reasons, that AA is the best recovery program there is. Another thing that I noticed the medical fraternity, I think, is kind of responsible for is there's like two types of recovery out there. They call it, there's faith-based and there's evidence-based. Right there, automatically, massive red flags spring up for me. I find that's a huge problem for me, because there's either faith-based or there's evidence. So that's a sleight of hand. So that's saying anything that's not endorsed by the scientific community, like CBT, stuff like that, it's automatically faith-based and there's no evidence. The thing about like harm reduction and cognitive behavioral therapy and smart therapy and dialectic behavioral therapy, the evidence that those work are in the fact that they work. So people do those, they get better, and they go, wow, that's evidence-based because neuroplasticity and scientifically studied, blah, 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 all that kind of crap, right? Well, it's not crap, but all I'm saying is that if you guys go to NA, if you guys go to AA, if you guys go to CA, SAG, all the 12-step fellowships out there, what happens is people go there, they do the steps, they get sober, they live a better life. That's evidence. If someone came and wrote all that down and then published it in a paper, it would be evidence. So to call it faith-based and all this stuff evidence-based is already a huge sleight of hand, and I think it's a dick move as far as I'm concerned, because AA is still the most, statistically, the most successful. 12-step fellowships are statistically the best recovery model out there, so I just don't understand that. Let's get into why I think the steps work so well. So let's get CBT out of the way. So CBT, you got neurons, you got neural pathways that your neurons' action potentials, a little electrical excitations in your brain travel down, and some of them are used a lot and some of them aren't used very much. So what the principle of CBT kind of is neuroplasticity. So the use drugs or use alcohol highway that the neurons travel down is a big, huge highway. There's reflectors, it's 8 lanes, it's got a 200-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, all that stuff. So when shit hits the fan and there's an action potential, when we're triggered in a certain way, that's where our neurons go. Use drugs right now. We say, yes, sir. A little bit of dopamine is released. When we think about the drugs, severing the stop-go connection even more, and then we're very likely to use drugs. If you guys are drug addicts or an alcoholic like myself, you can relate from your own personal experience that you will always use drugs instead of not use drugs. So what neuroplasticity is, like, through behavioral awareness, self-discipline, and little like strategies you can employ when you feel triggered and stuff like that, you choose the non-drug, non-alcohol at this point it's maybe like a little game trail or something like that instead of the highway. And then after you do this for a certain amount of time, probably a really long time, especially in my case, I was using drugs for a decade, so it would take a while. I would eventually, that path that is not using drugs or alcohol would become more developed, and it would turn into a highway, and that highway would kind of crowd over and stuff like that. And that's essential. I know I'm probably butchering it a little bit, but that's the essential principle, neuroplasticity, behind cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, we do that in the steps though. That's the thing. The steps contains cognitive behavioral therapy within. We don't call it that. You guys are praying every day, you're meditating every day, you're step 10ing when things arise. That stuff will get ingrained, and it'll get cattle branded into your brain, and neuroplasticity will result the repetition. So bada bang, bada boom. The steps has that in it. Another thing is, I don't know if you guys saw my video about why you chose the DOC that you did choose. And I was talking about a book called Effective Neuroscience, and the author of that book, he loves 12-step recovery programs, and he's not a faith-based man. He's not a believer, if you will. He's not a spiritual guy. He's an imperial, practical scientist. But he says there's kind of like a little bit of an inbuilt hierarchy within the fellowship, and you can start your own meeting, and you can sponsor a lot of guys, and you can kind of get ingrained in there. And he says that's really good for the seeking system. So he says, like, just the way that it's set up with the fellowship and everything like that, and like you can get different service positions and share at bigger meetings, and there's all that kind of stuff is really, really good at activating an inactive seeking system. So that's why he also says that because the fellowship becomes so close, and you do get a service position, and people want you to stick around, and people congratulate you for coming back, and they really want you to be there genuinely, that's really good for the grief panic system. So that also suppresses the grief panic system. So in a completely different way than the steps say, affective neuroscience says that the way that you get set up within a fellowship and the program of action actually is very, very good at balancing your emotional generation systems. Another reason why I like the steps is because it's not just human beings aren't robots. I don't believe CBT, DBT, smart recovery, just psychotherapy, just seeing a counselor, that kind of stuff, maybe doing a lemon juice cleanse, is just going to the gym, is very meaningful. Although all that stuff is good, and I actually do all that stuff myself, like, don't get me wrong, like, I talk hella shit about all those other ways of getting better, but I also do all of them myself. I just know that 12 steps were the actual catalyst. But the fundamental difference between AA or NA or whatever the fuck one you want to do it and the rest of them is that there's a sense of meaning and purpose. Spiritual growth, banding together with your brothers and overcoming an illness that's killing people across the nation is deeply meaningful, and it resonates with me on a spiritual level. Like, I get pumped up. Like, I go to people's cakes, and I see them tell their stories about how bad their lives was and how they got better, and like, it just makes me want to cry. And I think about my own journey. I think about all the pain and the suffering and the misery that we go through, and I see people on a daily basis rise above all an seemingly insurmountable amount of obstacles in their life, and they actually overcome and they get better. Like, I know this one lady who was living under a bridge for years, and now she's like going to school to become a psychologist. Like the craziest transformations happen, and there's something deeply fulfilling and meaningful about that. Working with sponsees is deeply meaningful. Like, I never thought I would be in the position to be able to help people one day and actually make a difference in other people's lives. Like, I couldn't take care of myself at all. I couldn't even hold down a part-time job, and now I'm like working all day, going to school at night, and also helping people. Like, the power that's in these fellowships is immense, and it cannot be understated. You don't get that kind of shit from going to a doctor's office, sitting in a chair, and just talking shit out or employing these behavioral awareness strategies. Like, CBT is great and all, but alcohol is an addiction. It's not a behavioral condition. If it was a simple matter of just being aware of your behaviors, being aware of the consequences that they cause and then changing it, we would have done so right, like easily. Like I would have recovered like 9 years ago. It would have been no problem. Oh, you mean these behaviors are bad? Well, how to not do them? Oh, just do that? Okay, I won't do them anymore. Like, think about it. If you guys are alcoholic addict like me, you immediately understand that it doesn't work like that. Other things that are going on in the steps, like look at steps 5, 6, and 7. Step 5 is essentially the religious confession, which is essentially the oldest form of therapy we got, catharsis, way back in ancient Greece with Aristotle and whatnot. That's old faithful. Like, we can't understand, like, lots of times these things like talk about it releases its power and stuff like that, and we hear these sayings and eventually we become deaf to them and we just go, that's like fucking, it sounds stupid. But really, man, when there's a repression involved from a traumatic event or maybe an embarrassing event or something that we really didn't want to happen, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, these repressions, they don't go anywhere. They stay there. And there's always a complex or a neuroses involved with them, meaning there's certain triggers will trigger certain weird psychic reflexes, behavioral patterns that are associated with these events. Actually, when you talk about these things on a very detailed basis, what happens is a process of abreaction. The emotional attachment to these events actually dissipates and it leaves our body, and then with that the neuroses and the complex kind of goes away. In the medical fraternity they will call this extinction. It's one of the process in which humans can overcome certain fears that they have. Like, I mean, there's so much going on in the steps, like effective treatment for PTSD, like talking about these things in detail in confidence, in a safe place with your sponsor, someone that you trust and that's helping you through your problems. You know, PTSD, like, you need to talk about that kind of stuff. You need to understand what happened. You need to understand that the likelihood of that stuff happening again is not good. That provides a tremendous amount of relief. Also, even after that, when you do your step 6 and 7, like, you get your list of defects of character, and defects of character are abstractions. Hey, they're not things. They're a collection of a set of behaviors. If you're a false pride guy, you don't go around false priding at people. You go around intimidating people. You go around one-upping people. You go around manipulating, lying, getting your way. There's a bunch of behaviors that are associated with false pride. In the process of 4, 5, and 6, you actually fully identify what all these things are. You actually need to be aware of what behaviors you have in order to they have to be brought forth into consciousness before they can be expelled, before power can take them away from us. There's a certain amount of specificity we need when we're talking about what are the things that we do. And this is also goes back to behavioral therapy. Behavioral therapy is included in the steps as well as many other things. But we actually need some awareness around the behaviors that we are exhibiting. I went through my whole life trying to do what was the best thing for me at any given time. Sometimes what was best for me now wasn't going to be good for me later, which was most of the time, but I always tried to do what was best for me. Like, I always wanted to feel better or get better or have my life go better or have people I wanted every aspect of my life to be better than it was 100% of the time, all the time. And I only got farther and farther away. So there's lots of, and I know it's not the world that's doing this to me. It's not other people that are doing this to me, although sometimes that is the case, but it's me. The common denominator is always me. I'm the one that's doing all this stuff. I'm putting in the legwork to make this thing happen, and if I don't understand that, then it's gonna keep happening for the rest of my life. Okay guys, I'm gonna end the video now. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to hit the like and hit the subscribe. One last thing, I know there's way more reasons why the steps are awesome, and I'm going to put them in another video. I just don't have the reasons in front of me right now, but I'll get back to you guys. Thanks, bye.